Today, we are diving into a pretty wild claim from the YouTube channel Planetary Veritas. They're challenging something we thought we knew for sure in space science, the Van Allen radiation belts. And this quote, well, it gets right to the heart of their argument. The claim isn't just that the belts are dangerous, it's that they are completely artificial. That's a huge assertion, so let's break down the evidence they've pieced together to back it up. So let's start with that core idea, that these massive zones of radiation wrapped around our planet weren't discovered, they were built. Now, right off the bat, this idea completely flips decades of established science on its head. It suggests there's a secret history behind one of the very first major discoveries of the entire space age. Okay, so this is what we all learned in school, right? The textbook definition. These are supposed to be totally natural, just solar particles that get snagged by our planet's magnetic field. But the source we're looking at today says that this whole explanation is just a cover story.
So where does this argument even come from? Well, the source points to a paper trail claiming the real story is just hiding in plain sight, right inside official documents.
The whole case really hinges on how you interpret a handful of documents, and maybe most importantly, their dates. The source believes that when you put these puzzle pieces together, a very, very different picture starts to emerge. And here's the first piece of evidence they present. It's a letter from 1953, from NASA to Dr. James Van Allen himself, and it's rejecting his proposal to study cosmic rays. The source sees this as a huge red flag on the timeline. Now check out the sequence of events here, because this is what the source finds so suspicious. First, 1953, Van Allen's experiment gets a no. Then, 5 years later, August 1958, the US government starts detonating nuclear bombs way up in the atmosphere. And it's only after those tests, later that same year, that Van Allen suddenly gets the credit for discovering the belts. The source says, no way that's a coincidence. And this is what's presented as the smoking gun. It's from a technical report from 1966, looking back at the data from 1958. And it uses this exact phrase, Argus injected, geomagnetically trapped radiation. For the source, that word, injected, is basically a confession. Which brings us to the big question the source wants us to ask. If these belts were a natural discovery, why on earth would an official document from that time describe radiation being injected into the sky by a secret military operation? Okay, so let's look at how they supposedly pulled this off. What's the mechanism the source proposes for creating these artificial belts in the first place? The culprit, according to this theory, is Operation Argus. And these weren't your typical nuclear tests. No, these were detonated at extremely high altitudes, right where the inner Van Allen belt happens to be. So the key distinction here is between these two types of radiation. The argument is that what we're seeing up there isn't from the sun, slowly building up over eons. It's a massive, sudden, man-made blast of radiation from these nuclear tests. This quote really highlights the conviction behind the whole claim. The source is absolutely adamant that Operation Argus wasn't just some random experiment. It was a deliberate act with the goal of creating a permanent feature around our planet. Now, if this theory is true, it has some massive implications. And the source claims one of the biggest is a glaring contradiction in NASA's own story about astronaut safety. The argument is pretty simple, really. If the belts are as radioactive as they seem to be, and astronauts have to fly through them, then how come NASA's own safety numbers? Well, they just don't add up. The source points directly to this official statement from a NASA doctor. It's very clear. No astronaut has ever been diagnosed with space radiation sickness. Remember that, because it's a key piece of the puzzle here. Okay, now let's talk numbers. According to a NASA document that the source cites, this is the maximum recommended annual dose of radiation for an astronaut, 50 rem. Rem is just a unit for radiation dosage, so the limit for a whole year is 50. But here's the paradox. The source highlights that the very same NASA documents also state that an astronaut on just a 3-month trip to the ISS gets exposed to over 3 times that yearly limit. We're talking more than 150 rem in just a quarter of a year. And this chart really shows you why that number matters so much. At just 25 to 50 rem, your white blood cell count starts to drop. At 150 to 350, a person should be showing signs of acute radiation syndrome.
So the question the source is asking is, how can astronauts supposedly get blasted with this much radiation, but at the same time, not a single one has ever been diagnosed with radiation sickness?
So this all leads to the final and maybe the most speculative part of the whole claim. If the belts are man-made, then why? What could possibly be the motive?
The source throws out a few possibilities. Was it designed as a cage to keep humanity from ever leaving Earth? Or was it a shield to keep something else from getting in? The video even suggests that UFO sightings often seem to cluster over areas with high radioactivity, hinting that maybe it was some kind of defense system.
And that is the question we're left with. By weaving together official documents, timelines, and scientific data, the source material builds this incredible narrative of a man-made barrier in the sky. It's a fascinating theory, and it really challenges you to ask what else could be hidden in the documents from the dawn of the space age.